Hello and welcome back to VEDS, where I vlog every other day in September. My friend and fellow VEDSy James has challenged me this month to make a video kind of outlining what I would do if I was put in charge of a Superman movie. He also asked me to talk about what I think of the James Gunn Superman project that is currently in production. I don't necessarily trust DC right now, and the fact that they announced a ton of other superheroes like Mr. Terrific and Guy Gardner, and I think Hawkgirl are going to be in the movie. That doesn't give me hope. But if they primarily focus on my boy Clark, and all the other characters that they've announced are just kind of minor pieces of the story and aren't like a real task in universe building, then I could see some potential for it being okay. I also think that there's very good potential that it will be the best Superman movie since the first one, because most of the Superman movies haven't been very good. So, it's a definitive... Well, I know how he feels about it. So, it's a definitive... we'll see. But the other part of this challenge is perfect for me, because not only do I have thoughts on what I would do for a Superman movie, I have written part of a script for what I would do as a Superman movie. It's a creative project when I kind of get into writer's block or can't come up with ideas for any other creative projects. I'll boot up that script and write a couple pages. And I actually have an outline for an entire Superman trilogy. So I won't go too in-depth on like the entire outline, but I'll give the broad overview. And let me start off by talking about what my influences would be. First is the Max Fleischer Superman cartoons. That was my first exposure to Superman growing up. I still think in a lot of ways it is one of the best versions of it. It's one of the versions that historically added a lot of stuff to the mythos, which is impressive because it has such simple stories. Next is Superman Man for All Seasons, which is an excellent small like encapsulation of Clark as a character primarily. Like there's plenty of Superman stuff in there, but I feel like that's a book that just is very focused on defining who Clark is, which I think is very important. I'm a big fan of the arc in the comics where Lex Luthor became president. And of course, the Bruce Timm animated stuff, the Superman the Animated Series, the Justice League Unlimited. Those are honestly why I don't care if the DC live action stuff is good, because he and his team just completely nailed what the DC universe should be in multimedia, and I am a big fan of especially Justice League and their depiction of Superman. Especially the episode where Toyman sends him into the future and everyone thinks he's dead. I think that's a great episode. Once again, that very much gets to who Clark is primarily, and Superman is adjacent to that. Okay, so what would my Superman story look like? The first one is him coming to Metropolis and him setting up. There's some Man for All Seasons stuff in there that I can pull from. Also, I think that My Adventures with Superman is a pretty good exploration of what that would look like. But really what I want it to be is searching for, it's like, well, he has all this power. Why should he use it? Or should he use it? I think that needs to be the primary question. And we're going to see several points in the movie, starting at the very beginning when he saves Lana Lang from a fire at her farm. We're going to see at different points where his natural instinct to save people just kicks in. And it is those moments of pressure when we see his noblest intentions. And it is when he gets away from that when he starts getting anxiety about how best to use his powers. I don't want this to turn into Man of Steel. I don't want there to be any obvious moments when he should do something that he doesn't. But I want him to be recognizing the fact that he can do both really good stuff, but also has an ability that no one else can do. And so he has to figure out a way to balance that. I think a key part of that is that Lois, starting out, doesn't really like Superman that much, or at least she's suspicious of it. She's very much a hold truth to power sort of reporter, and so when she sees this very powerful person, she is very focused on how to suss out his motivations. And working alongside her, Clark is going to see this, and that's going to be kind of one of the drawing factors that makes him interrogate who he is and what he should be doing. Lex Luthor is also going to be a presence in this movie, but he's not the main bad guy. He is a person who is important in the city, and he has thoughts on Superman, and he likes to make those known. He doesn't like Superman. He's not a fan, I should lay out, but he's not explicitly a villain. For this, I'm actually drawing inspiration from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies and how Harry is a constant presence in those. And so you get kind of like a full character arc in those 3 movies with Harry before he becomes the Green Goblin. Now, of course, a lot of people don't like where that goes, but I think that that character progression is missing from a lot of superhero movies nowadays that Sam Raimi was really focused on in those movies, or at least focused on with Harry. I think I can't start talking about those movies. That's a whole other thing. And you might be like, okay, if Lex Luthor isn't the bad guy, who is? There isn't one. This is my big thing with this movie. I don't think there should be a villain. And if you watched my Adventures with Superman video last year, you may know what I'm about to say. Natural disaster, baby. What we don't need here is an evil villain. What we need is a push to get Clark to fully embrace who he is going to be. As part of that, there is going to be a hurricane or a flood or some type of natural event, a natural disaster that hits Metropolis. And like I said, under pressure, his best motives come out. His instinct to save people and to take care of people come out. And that's what happens. And it's one, I think that a natural disaster gives you a lot of cool like feats of strength. And I imagine if I was to do this, it'd have its own score, it'd be really great. But there would be a point, kind of like in Creed, when Creed gets knocked down in the final fight and then he gets up and that's the only time you hear the Rocky theme play. In this, there'd be a time where like he's flying into the hurricane or whatever and it knocks him back. And like he has to like ground himself and like push through. And that's the only time you hear the John Williams score. Like you just hear a little bit of a like dun 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 dun. I actually think that's not the John Williams score. That's the score from the Max Fleischer cartoons, which also could make a cameo appearance. But you know, like the Superman score kicks in and he saves people. And that is kind of the turn that we get with him fully embracing his role and being like, I can use this power for good. That's also the turn when Lois is going to like kind of finish her final piece on him and be like, this is like a person who is like a friend of Metropolis. This is someone that we can trust. And it is, of course, the time where Lex Luthor is going to fully be like, this ain't good. And of course, Jimmy Olsen's in the movie, but I can't talk about that because that would be the whole video. And so that would be my first Superman movie. I want a Superman movie that's about Clark, that's about the character, and it isn't, we have to shove in all this lore. The reason I like Superman is that he's a paragon of hope. He is a person with the most power, and he doesn't use that for evil. He always chooses good. Some people think that's what makes Superman boring. For me, that's what makes Superman interesting, and that's what makes Superman fun to read. Because I want my superheroes to be paragons sometimes. Sometimes, like, I like morally questionable superheroes, but I also like superheroes who are tested and who make the right choice. I also think that not having a villain would get it away from a lot of the tropes that have always been in superhero movies. And I think that would be a very useful thing to do nowadays when people are getting burnt out on superhero movies. Okay, so I'm briefly going to talk about what I would want my second and third Superman movies to be. The second one, Superman is fully established. He's doing his thing. Maybe we get like a fight with Toyman at the beginning, or I would want it to be Mr. Mixopolitics, but that might be a harder sell for a studio. Lex is getting into politics. That is his big thing. He is moving into the political game. So the first movie is about, do I use this power? The second movie, I think, needs to interrogate how to use this power well and how can this power be used poorly. And that's when we do bring in a villain. In fact, we're going to have two villains in this movie. But the first villain, the primary villain, is going to be Zod. Zod's going to come in, and it is going to be a thing where Zod is trying to take over the planet, and he's trying to figure out why Clark doesn't want to take over the planet. And you can maybe get into some of the Krypton backstory stuff if you want. I'm not super invested in that stuff for this story, but you can if you want. And this is a real test for Clark and for everyone around Clark. It's like, do you trust this Superman when you see what else he could be, when you have Zod to compare him? And of course, Lex, who is more and more becoming a presence in these movies, doesn't. And he just happens to have been working on a way to stop Superman if he ever turns evil, so might as well give that a shot. And you find out that he's been working on Project Metallo. Metallo is a Superman villain who's a cyborg powered by kryptonite, and so kind of the perfect weapon to use against Superman. So in the big final confrontation between Zod and Superman, Lex drops Metallo in. And Metallo has one goal, and that's to kill both Kryptonians. So Zod and Superman kind of team up a little bit to kill Metallo, and then I imagine there being some conflict where Zod's like, no matter how good you are, no matter how much you do for them, this is always what they're going to do. They're never going to trust you, and when they get the chance, they're going to kill you. And Superman goes, then I have to be better. Because that is Superman's whole thing. One day they will meet you in the sun. He has to be the best version. And Clark can't be that. But Clark understands that Superman has to be that. And that's kind of the sacrifice that Clark makes when he puts on the costume. You know, he isn't like Spider-Man who has to give up his normal life. Clark can have a normal life and be Superman, but he has to give up like a piece of his humanity so he can be that paragon, and I want to make that textual in this story. So, of course, he beats Zod. And Lex spins his work with Metallo and being like, I helped defend the planet into a presidential campaign, and movie ends with him getting elected. Okay, the third movie, which is my least developed, it's the one I've thought about least. I kind of have the thematic overarching thing, like, yeah, the idea of like, when, or should I use my power? When should I use my power? How should I use my power? Which is in the second movie. This is, when do I give up my power? Or when would be a good time to give up my power? Like I said, very sketchy overview, but like Lex is president. Brainiac is the main villain. I think Brainiac would be different in this. I think he's less about like collecting data and stuff. Like that's still part of him. But I think his thing is that he's kind of the AI pulling from the Superman animated series. He was on Krypton. But make it like a less malevolent thing and more of like he blames himself for Krypton being destroyed. And so he's going to these planets trying to save them by collecting all their knowledge and stuff. Maybe that's why he has like his bottle cities and stuff. Because he's like, I couldn't save the whole planet, but I could get this one. It's that thing where it's like, well, the more you try to save something, the more you're actually endangering it. And so Brainiac comes to Earth and he's like, I'm going to try to save this planet. There are all these reasons. And, you know, through this, he's destroying it. It's you know, this kind of tension he has where it's like, how do you give up power? When do you give up power? Both he and Lex are going to have to focus in on this because Lex has made it so Superman is very boxed in. There's more like red tape to it. And eventually Lex has to kind of surrender the power he has put over Superman so that Superman can go save him. My problem with this one is that it's very villain focused and I haven't quite figured out what Superman's deal in it is. Like I said, this is my least developed one because when I do work on this project, I'm usually working on the first one. And then that kind of carries over into the second one. Haven't quite made it to patching out the third one. So if I was to ever like actually write these out, I'm never going to make a Superman movie. But let's say I was ever going to like fully script them or whatnot, this would be the one that would probably change the most. But I like that thematic overarching thing. And I also like the idea of Lex gets to the end of the trilogy without ever being the big bad. He's an antagonist. He definitely does some shady stuff. But I think by the end of this, he and Clark are working together, kind of, or at least there's more of a mutual respect there. But like I said, lots of stuff that would probably end up on the cutting room floor if I ever actually got to writing this one out. Also, Mercy Graves would be in the movies, and she wouldn't just get killed off like she did in Batman v Superman. Back when I originally scripted these out, I'm like, well, could I spin it off into a whole new movie or like a whole new universe of movies? And it ended with Mercy passing on information that Lex had collected on other superheroes to Superman. I have less interest in that nowadays, but that was kind of my universe building kind of idea. And I think if I ever went past 3 movies, I think I would focus on Superman in space, doing something cosmic, and then maybe have, like, if you have Brainiac, then you can have Kandor, and you can bring in Supergirl, and maybe Supergirl. There are no more Superman movies, but we have Supergirl movies now. I don't know. That's all universe building stuff that interests me less and less in my jaded late 20s. So yeah, that's my overall kind of concept for, if I was given the keys to Superman, what would my Superman project look like? I always like when a fellow VEDSy gives me a challenge or an excuse to talk about superheroes, because I have a kind of block in my brain where it's like, well, if I talk about superheroes, that's all I'm going to talk about sometimes. And so I just end up trying to avoid the topic a lot of time. I don't know what my next video is going to be, and I need to film it today. I need to film actually probably 2 or 3 more today. So I may just continue the superhero trend into the next video. But that's something I have to think about when I turn the camera off. So I will see y'all later.